The first transmission out of Callisto came in at 0340 station time, 11 days after the Veyrath maintenance crews left the outer distribution hub. I was in the intelligence annex aboard ISV Threnody when it arrived. A water analysis flag from the settlement's automated monitoring array routed through 4 relay stations before it reached us. By the time I finished reading the header, a second flag had come in, then a third. I called my supervisor. He was already on the line with Earth. In the end, it took 11 days for 140,000 people to die. The Dominion's pathogen was elegant in the way that administrative decisions are elegant, efficient, deniable, thorough. It entered the Callisto distribution network through the outer hub's pressure equalization valves, which the Veyrath maintenance crew had certified as clean before departure. The compound was slow kill by design. It didn't announce itself. By the time the first colonists presented symptoms, it had been in the water for 6 days. By the time the medical bay identified the vector and shut the network down, 31,000 people had already crossed the threshold past which intervention was clinically meaningless. The hospice ward on sublevel 4, 3,100 patients, most of them children under 12, admitted for respiratory conditions that made them drink more frequently than an average adult, was the first section of the settlement to lose its entire population. I have written that sentence many times in the years since. I have never found a way to make it shorter without making it less true. The Dominion's diplomatic channel filed a brief administrative note 14 days after the last colonist died. It classified the event as a resource clarification procedure, a term their bureaucratic code used for the assertion of territorial claim over an unregistered settlement. They attached a survey manifest. The manifest listed Callisto as uninhabited. Earth received the note. Earth read it. Earth did not reply. I was reassigned 3 days later. My transfer orders described my new posting as Forward Observation, Ardent Compact, ISV Threnody, Bridge Complement. I had been an analyst for 9 years. I had never held a posting that used the word forward before. I packed what I could carry in one bag and reported to Dock 7 at 0600. The Ardent Compact was already assembling when I arrived. 312 ships. I had processed the authorization request myself 6 weeks before my transfer orders came through, when it was still a number on a fleet logistics worksheet, rather than something you could stand on a dock and watch forming up in the dark. Seeing it was different from reading it. The Threnody was a heavy command cruiser, 1.4 kilometers of reinforced hull plating, forward batteries recessed behind armored shutters, a flight deck that could run 42 strike craft simultaneously. She was the third largest vessel in the compact. The 2 ships above her in displacement were already in position at the head of the formation when I boarded. I asked my new commanding officer, Fleet Captain Davin Orris, whether a warning transmission had been authorized. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "No." A diplomatic channel? No. A demand for Commander. He turned back to his display. Log your station and prepare for departure. I logged my station. I prepared for departure. I did not ask again. The Ardent Compact crossed into open transit corridor at 0900 and held formation silence for the duration of the crossing. No broadband transmissions. No navigational pings beyond minimum safety thresholds. 312 ships moving through the dark without a word between them that wasn't operationally necessary. I sat at my observer station on the bridge and processed the sensor feeds as they came in, and tried to find, somewhere in the documentation I was there to compile, a category for what I was watching. I had spent 9 years filing things correctly. I could not find the category. The crossing took 19 days. I have been asked since what those 19 days were like aboard the Threnody, and I have never answered the question to anyone's satisfaction, including my own. The crew was not loud. They were not loud in a particular way, not the controlled quiet of people waiting for orders, but the specific quiet of people who had already made a decision and were simply moving toward it. I ate in the mess. I slept in my bunk. I reviewed the Callisto settlement files every morning at 0500, because that was the only useful thing I could think to do with the hours, and because every morning at 0500, I was still an analyst, and the files were still my responsibility, and they were the only place left where I could find anything to file correctly. On the 14th day of the crossing, A young signals specialist named Owen Brett requested access to the settlement's residential directory, the full name and unit list, every colonist registered at the time of the incident. He did not tell me why he wanted it. I authorized the access and did not ask. When I passed his station 6 hours later, his screen was dark, and he was looking at the bulkhead with the particular expression of someone who has finished a thing they did not want to finish and now has to go on living in the same body that did it. Nobody spoke about Callisto on the crossing. That was not an order. It was simply what the compact was. The Veyrath home system came onto long-range sensors on the 19th day. It was a large system by the standards of the systems we had mapped. 4 rocky inner planets, 2 gas giants, a dense asteroid belt that the Dominion mined for heavy metals to fund their administrative expansion. The homeworld sat at the inner edge of the second orbital band, a planet of moderate size with a thin atmosphere the Dominion had spent centuries enriching with greenhouse infrastructure. Orbital platforms, 7 of them, each the size of a mid-sized station, formed a loose defensive ring in low orbit. Their weapons were calibrated for interdiction of single vessels or small raider groups. The Dominion had not fought a peer opponent in recorded history. They had administered. They had surveyed. They had filed resource clarification procedures. Fleet Captain Orris read the sensor summary. He gave 3 orders. The first, repositioned our strike craft squadrons to forward deployment bays. The second, adjusted our approach vector by 4 degrees, bringing the full weight of the formation's forward batteries into alignment with the orbital platform cluster. The third was to signals, maintain communication silence. At 11:40, the Dominion's planetary defense network detected us. At 11:43, they opened a channel. The channel request came in on the standard diplomatic frequency, the frequency that every space-capable civilization in the charted systems used when they wanted to talk. It arrived on the Threnodi's communications console as a soft chime and a blinking indicator light. The communications officer looked at it. She looked at Fleet Captain Orris. He did not look back at her. She looked at me, because I was the observer, and she wanted someone to tell her what to do with a thing that had no precedent in her operating protocols. I had nothing to tell her. I looked at the light blinking on her console, and thought about a water analysis flag arriving at 0340, and thought about a survey manifest that listed Callisto as uninhabited, and I did not say anything. The channel request timed out after 60 seconds and repeated. The compact continued its approach. The Dominion's second request came in 4 minutes later on a secondary frequency, flagged as urgent. A third came on a tertiary frequency 8 minutes after that. By then, the Threnodi's forward batteries had cycled to active charge, and the strike craft squadrons were holding in their bay doors, ready for launch authorization. The orbital platforms had attempted to hail us on 6 different frequencies. They had received 6 silences in return. At 11:58, the Dominion's Orbital Authority Coordinator, a senior administrative officer whose name appeared in the registry as Havith Soon Kral, broke from the standard channel protocol and transmitted a voice message on an open frequency. The translation came through the Threnodi's linguistic system in flat, accented standard. He identified himself by rank and title. He stated that the compact's approach vector constituted an unauthorized entry into sovereign Dominion space. He stated that the Dominion was prepared to engage in formal discussion of any registered grievance under the Interstellar Registry's dispute resolution framework. He stated that a failure to establish communication contact within the next 15 minutes would be interpreted as a hostile act, and that the Planetary Defense Network would respond accordingly. He said all of this in a careful, measured voice, an administrative voice, the voice of someone accustomed to filing the correct paperwork. Fleet Captain Orris listened to the translation. He did not give an order. He did not need to give one. The communications officer's hands were folded on her console. The signals specialist, Owen Brett, was looking straight ahead at his scope display. 15 minutes passed. The Dominion's planetary defense network did not respond accordingly, because the men and women operating the orbital platforms had looked at their threat assessments and understood, at some level beneath formal procedure, what 312 warships arriving in silence meant about the nature of the encounter they were in. At 12:07, Fleet Captain Orris authorized the first engagement sequence. I think, sometimes, about what it must have looked like from the surface. 312 warships, moving in formation, not answering, not threatening, not demanding, simply arriving, in the cold procedural way that a fact arrives, already true before you finish reading it. At 12:07, Fleet Captain Orris authorized the first engagement sequence. I will not recount it in detail here. That is not what this document is for. The fleet's operational logs carry the complete record, the sequence of platform neutralizations, the descent of the strike craft squadrons to low orbital altitude, the systematic disabling of the Dominion's interstellar communications relay infrastructure. Nothing on the surface was struck. That is in the record as well. Earth's authorization had been specific on that point. The population was not the named target. The Dominion's capacity to administer, to survey, to file resource clarification procedures, that was the named target. I will say this much. It was methodical. Platform 1 was neutralized in 11 minutes. Platforms 2 and 3 simultaneously, 7 minutes after that. The strike craft squadrons worked in 2 craft pairs, 1 suppressor, 1 finisher, cycling through their assigned target sectors without deviation. The Dominion's point defense systems fired when they could. They were not designed for this. They were designed for a different conversation than the one we were having. By the time Platform 4 went dark, the defense network had stopped trying to raise us on open frequencies and had redirected its communications bandwidth to the homeworld's surface command infrastructure instead, which I noted in my observer log as the point at which Havith Sun-Kral's dispute resolution framework was formally abandoned by the people it was meant to protect. By 1340, all 7 orbital platforms had been reduced to debris fields drifting in low orbit. By 1610, the Dominion's relay infrastructure was offline across 9 of its 14 administered systems. At 1814, Fleet Captain Orris authorized a single outgoing transmission. It was not a channel request, and it was not a demand, and it was not a warning. It was a statement of 3 sentences, broadcast simultaneously on all available frequencies to every Dominion-controlled system within range. I composed it. That was my job. I was the observer, the recorder, the person whose function was to put the correct words to the event that was occurring. The first sentence named the offense, the exact act, the exact target, the exact number, the compound and its mechanism, and the 11 days, and the 3,100 children on sublevel 4 of the Callisto settlement, who had needed to drink more water than the adults, and had died first because of it. The second sentence named the response, the Ardent Compact, 312 vessels, full combat authorization, no channel opened before engagement, no channel to be opened after. The third sentence said that no further clarification procedure filed against any settlement, registered or unregistered, would be answered differently. Then the transmission ended. The compact held position for 6 hours, maintaining communications silence, while the Dominion's surviving administrative infrastructure attempted to reach us on every frequency it had. At 0020, Fleet Captain Orris ordered the formation to turn and begin transit back to human space. 312 ships rotated in sequence, slow and deliberate as a sentence being written down in permanent ink, and began to move. I sat at my observer station and compiled my log. The Veyrath Dominion submitted a formal diplomatic complaint to the Interstellar Registry 42 days later. The complaint referenced the destruction of the orbital platforms and the relay infrastructure and the breach of established communication protocols. It requested a hearing. It requested arbitration. It requested, in one memorable section, that Earth clarify the intent behind what the complaint described as an escalatory non-response posture. Earth did not reply. That is the thing about a doctrine that expresses itself through silence. There is nothing to argue with. There is no channel to call back. There is no record of a threat made, because no threat was made, only a fact, delivered in the form of 312 ships arriving without a word and leaving without one, and the debris of 7 orbital platforms settling into a slow drift around a homeworld that had, until 19 days prior, never considered the possibility that the people it administered might have assembled a fleet specifically for them. I filed my observer report. I transferred back to the intelligence annex. I returned to the work of processing transmission flags and water analysis alerts, and the quiet, procedural cataloging of things that happen in the dark between systems. The Callisto settlement was rebuilt. It took 4 years. The water network was rebuilt, with a monitoring architecture that no maintenance crew from any external authority would ever be certified to touch again. The hospice ward on sublevel 4 was rebuilt larger than it had been before, on the same sublevel, in the same location, with the same number of beds. The plaque outside reads, 140,000. Nothing else. It doesn't need anything else. No clarification procedure has been filed against a human settlement since.